Okay, so what we're going to talk about here are the roles of worker preferences and information. Okay, so one of the major features of the job market in general is that it provides the signals and mechanisms by which workers trying to maximize their household production. So remember, like the value of all the income that they earn and like the work that they do at the home and their leisure, with employers who are trying to maximize their profits. Okay, so think about that for the minute. On the one hand, over here, right, we have people who want to earn wages by going to work, and on the other hand, we have companies that want to earn profits by employing people. And somehow, we've got to find a way to match the people that want to work with the people that want to hire. So we have to find a way to match these two people, these two groups of people together, right? And somehow, and we also want to match workers and employers together by like working characteristics. Okay, so there's lots of factors and lots of dimensions on which matching has to occur. Okay, and so this process, as we've sort of alluded to in the past, is incredibly complex. Right, workers. There's not like some typical worker. Right, workers all have varying skills and preferences for work. And employers all offer jobs that differ in requirement and working environments. And so finding a good match between employers and employees might be somewhat of a trial and error process, right? And whether or not this process works has some serious implications for policy. So on the one hand, if we assume that workers seek to maximize their utility, right? So we're saying they maximize utility, all right? Then we're also somewhat assuming that there's more to life and work than just money. At the same time, though, we do know some general things. And so, for example, suppose that we have two jobs that are identical in every way, including location, except one of them pays higher than the other. Okay? And so we have two jobs, right? One pays, let's say, $10 per hour, and the other pays $15 per hour, right? And everything else about the jobs is exactly the same, okay? Literally everything else, right? In this hyper stylized example, what do you think? Do you think people would work for $10 an hour or $15 per hour, right? Most people seem pretty confident in saying that, yeah, people will work for $15 per hour. And indeed, they will, right? If you can have more money versus less money, all other things equal, we should expect to see people take the job that pays the most, right? And so if this is true, if everything's the same, right, then people should strictly prefer the higher paying job. Right? And this seems like a pretty innocent statement, right? There seems like nothing controversial here, but it's the insight that it conveys. It goes largely ignored by a lot of people, right? People will say things like, well, money isn't everything, right? And it's true, right? It's true that money isn't everything, but more money is always preferred to less money when all else is the same. Okay. Now, some people, including like my parents and my family members, they'll come back to me and they'll say, I don't think that's true. But it's hard to argue against this, right? So if you want proof of it, show me the person who wants to have less money, and I will gladly give them the routing number for my bank account, and they can deposit all the excess money that they want, right? Now, I've made this offer to, at this point, probably close to 1,000 students. And each of you probably know 25 people at least, right? So 25,000 people have gotten this offer, and yet no one has called me asking for my routing number so they can give me money, right? And so that seems like pretty strong evidence that everyone actually thinks that more money is better than less money for themselves, right? Now, some people, this is the interesting, and it's a side note, right? Some people might say, oh, well, I don't have enough money, but like clearly, LeBron James has enough money. He doesn't need that money, right? Well, that's a different claim. That's a completely different claim. And so, you know, maybe we'll talk about some of that stuff today as well, okay? So having claims about other people's salaries is a very popular opinion, or is a very popular thing. But everyone seems to have the same opinion about their own salaries, and everyone seems to agree that they don't get paid enough, right? Or they would or at the very least, they would like to be paid more, right? And if you can find me a person who would like to be paid less, I would love to meet them and talk to them about this, okay? So shoot me an email if you know someone who would like to be paid less. I'll gladly talk to them, okay? Now, by the same token, so just like we said, people prefer to have more money to less money. It seems like it should also be true that, let's say we have a job that we have two jobs, right? So this is, you know, option 1 and option 2, or problem number 2, I guess we should say. Each one pays $10 per hour, right? But this one's a messy environment, and this one's clean, right? Everything else about the jobs is exactly the same. So we have one place that's messy, one place is clean, right? And everything else about them is exactly the same. Which one do you think people are going to want to work in, right? Well, we should probably expect that most people will, all other things being equal, choose the clean one, right? Or think of it as like a nice working environment. So would you rather work in a cubicle for $10 per hour or work in the corner office of a high-rise in New York City, right? And everything else is exactly the same, right? Including the cost of living. So let's, you know, let's control for everything, right? Would you rather work in a cubicle in the basement or the corner office of a high-rise, right? Probably the corner office of a high-rise, all other things being equal, right? Because it's a better working environment, okay? Or, let's see, or think of this one. Suppose I offered you an identical job to the one you currently have, assuming you're working, right? Everything is exactly the same, but if you come work in my office or for my company, right, you have to share an office with someone who clips their toenails in the office and burps constantly, right? Would you be willing to come work for me, right? Probably not, okay? But if I quadrupled your current salary, well, you might, okay? So trade-offs between, like, dollars, right, that's easy, right? You pick the one that has the most dollars. And decisions about, you know, clean or messy, well, you pick the one that's clean, assuming everything else is the same, right? And so the interesting question is, at what rate do people trade off money for cleanliness, right? Or money for nicer offices, or money for, you know, better colleagues, right? That's the interesting question, is the trade-off between dollars and working environments, okay? And so going back to the toenails thing, right? If I quadrupled your salary, I'm willing to bet that most of you would put up with the toenails and the burping, right? But what if I only paid you, let's say, $1,000 more per year, right? Probably most of you would say no to that, right? But maybe some of you would, right? And so the amazing thing about the job market in general is that it tends to accommodate all kinds of things, including ridiculous examples, right? So maybe not as ridiculous as, you know, clipping your toenails and burping in the office, right? But it does accommodate all kinds of different things, including different working conditions, different quality of colleagues, different qualities of offices, right? Different wages, all kinds of things. Okay, so for a minute, suppose that every job on the planet is exactly alike in terms of its workplace environment and its location, and that workers can costlessly move from one job to another. Okay, so everything's exactly the same, and in this world, the only difference between the jobs is the amount that they pay. And so if one company pays more than the others, that company will see a flood of applications to come work for them, right? And so let's say, you know, we have a high wage company, high initial wage, I should say. So, supply, demand, price, quantity, and then we have a low initial wage. Price, quantity, demand, supply. Okay. And so we have, this environment where these two jobs are exactly the same in every way, right? But this one pays less than the other. Well, what should we see? Well, we should probably expect to see people trying to jump ship. They'll move from this environment over here. And so the supply curve over here will shift to the right, and the supply curve over here will shift to the left. And so this will put upward pressure on the wage here and downward pressure on the wage here. And so the point here is that if all the things are the same, right, the equilibrium wage will be the same in both or all companies. All right, this is just the law of one price again. Right? And so as a result, in this hyper-stylized world, right, the wages across all firms would eventually be exactly the same, meaning that every job will be exactly the same in every way as every other job. Now, obviously, this isn't the case in the real world, right? And so there must be some means of allocating these workers among the employers, okay? So suppose that we have two firms, X and Y, firm X, and we have firm Y, okay? Both offer low-skilled workers $10 per hour, okay? So $10 per hour and $10 per hour, okay? But X is clean and safe, and Y is dirty and dangerous. Okay. Now, obviously, right, we should expect to see people flocking from Y over to X, right? So we should expect to see this movement, okay? But the question we could also ask is $10 an equilibrium wage, right? And the answer to that question is no, right? It's not, okay? This is, of course, assuming that people prefer clean and safe, which seems like a pretty safe assumption, okay? Now, because firm X can easily hire more workers because they now have a whole lot of job applicants, they don't have to offer raises, so they can stay at $10 per hour, okay? But if this company wanted to hire more workers, they'd have to either clean up the place and make it safer, pay more, or some combination of the two. If they don't clean the workplace at all, they'll just have to pay higher wages, right? So let's say instead of paying $10 per hour, firm Y pays $11 per hour, okay? And now the flow of workers from Y to X stops, okay? And so if we thought about that extra dollar per hour, because remember, everything about these two companies, including the job that they're doing, is exactly the same. And so the extra dollar would be a compensating wage differential, right? Because they would have to compensate the workers for working in this dirty and dangerous environment, okay? Now, so if you think about this, right, so is it the case that an additional dollar would get every worker at X? So do you think one more dollar per hour would induce everyone at X to switch and work to Y, okay? Do you think that would happen, right? Well, probably not. So think back to when you were living in the dorms, or if you are in the dorms, think about your dorms, right? Is it the case that some dorm rooms are cleaner than others, right? My guess is yes. Not all of your dorm rooms are exactly as clean as each other's, okay? And so the people with clean rooms probably place a higher value on cleanliness than people who live in messy rooms, right? And people in messy rooms probably place a higher value on having free time than the people who live in clean rooms, right? And so the only people who would be persuaded to switch from X to Y would be the people who value that extra dollar per hour more highly than a clean and safe working environment. Okay? If this wage differential did not exist, then Y wouldn't be able to attract anyone to come work for them at all because they would just go and work for X. Okay? Now let's do like a sort of an example. So let's talk about like the minimum wage. All right, so we've talked about this before, what its effects are. It's a price floor, causes unemployment, all that good stuff, right? Let's pretend that these are the only two companies in the world, okay? And so let's pretend we set the minimum wage at $10 per hour. What would be the effect here, right? Well, if we did, right, if that happened, nothing would be different, right? Firm X would keep paying $10 per hour, firm Y would keep paying $11 per hour, okay? Now, suppose that instead we raise the minimum wage to $11 per hour. Now what would the effect be, right? Well, now firm X has to pay $11 per hour, right? And firm Y is still paying $11 per hour. What do you think X is going to do, right? So X can't offer a lower price in exchange for a cleaner workplace, right? That can't happen anymore. Okay? They can't basically make the trade between dollars, between income for the workers and cleanliness and safety, right? And so now what might happen is X might switch to being dirty and unsafe, right? Because they have to pay the 11, they might not be able to afford cleaning the working environment, making sure everything's clean, right, and safe. And so they might have to switch to being dirty and unsafe, right? And so as a result of this, what happens, right? Well, all the workers at firm X who have demonstrated by working at X, they've demonstrated that they value cleanliness and safety more than the dollar, right? They value cleanliness and safety more than the extra dollar they would get, are now made worse off because now they're getting the dollar and dirtiness when they would rather give up the dollar and have cleanliness, right? And so what we've ended up seeing as a result of this, minimum wage is actually people who are getting more money but would rather get less money and have a clean and safe working environment, right? And so the unintended consequence right, would be X becomes dirty and unsafe, right? And so therefore, because employees generally do not like dirty work environments or unsafe working conditions, employers offering dirty and unsafe working conditions will end up having to pay higher wages than employers who offer clean and safe working environments. And so this has sort of two benefits. It serves a social need by giving people an incentive to voluntarily do dirty, unsafe, or unpleasant work that otherwise wouldn't get done. And at an individual level, it serves as a reward to workers who accept these jobs by paying them more than workers who are not willing to accept them. Okay? So let's sort of think about that. All right? Let's think about those sort of social and individual benefits. Right? So the social benefits. All right? So some jobs today are just flat out nasty. It would be extremely expensive to make safe and pleasant, right? So think about like coal mining or deep sea diving or police work, right? These are some very, nasty, unsafe, or unpleasant jobs to do, okay? And so there's sort of two ways to get people to do them. One way is to compel people to do it, as we did with the military draft in, not too long ago. And the other way is to induce them to do the job voluntarily, right? Now, most societies today rely on incentives, okay? Specifically compensating wage differentials to sort of recruit workers to do unpleasant or unsafe work, right? People will mine coal deep underground or weld steel beams together in 50-story buildings, right, or agree to work at night, not because they enjoy it, even though they might, right, but because compared to the other jobs that they qualify for, they pay well enough to make up for the difference. Okay? So working at night can be stressful because it disrupts your sleep pattern, but it also forces you off of everyone else's schedule. And so think about, if you work at night and you go out with friends, Saturday afternoon, it's incredibly difficult for you because Saturday afternoon is more like 2 o'clock in the morning to people who sleep during the night, right? And so imagine if your friend said like, "Hey, you want to go out and like go to the park at 2 in the morning?" You'd be like, "No, I want to sleep," right? Well, people who work at night, getting up in the afternoon can be much the same way, right? And so as a result of this, night shift workers typically make somewhere around 4% more than their day shift counterparts, assuming that everything about the jobs is close enough to equal, right? And night shift medical staff might make even more than this percentage increase due to the increased amount of trauma patients they see, right? And so as a result of these compensating wage differentials, these jobs, which are important to be done in an advanced society, actually get done, right? And so this is like tremendously beneficial. So think about what the world would be like if nobody did these things. Okay, so factories would close down at night, meaning that cars would be less available and more expensive. Buildings wouldn't be nearly as tall because no one would want to weld 50 feet up in the air because it'd be dangerous, right? Buildings wouldn't be as tall, and so real estate for everyone, including commercial and residential, would be more expensive. There wouldn't be doctors, nurses, or other medical staff available during the night, meaning that patients would just have to wait until the morning to get their treatment. And so as a result, society is immensely better off with compensating differentials than without them. So with compensating differentials, society is much better off. Right? Our buildings are taller, our cars are cheaper, we don't have to wait until morning to see the doctor, right? All kinds of tremendous benefits. Okay? And then the individual benefits. Right? The individuals also benefit. So some people don't mind these working conditions and so are willing to make the trade between working environments that are clean and safe and operate at normal times of the day for additional money. Right? Now, presumably, these people could also find work at some other job that wasn't dirty or wasn't unsafe and was during the day, but they chose to take the night job or the dirty job or the unsafe job anyway. Meaning that they prefer this to all the relevant alternatives. So of all the job offers that they had, working at night or working in the unsafe one or working in a dirty working environment was the best one that they had. Okay? And so a key insight here is that just because you personally might not want to do the job or find the trade-off worthwhile, someone else might, and that person probably knows what's best for them, maybe even better than you do. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't, point out that it's unfortunate that these people are working at night, for example. But at the same time, it's really not all that unfortunate because it must be better than all the other options that that person had. Okay, and so lamenting the fact that these people are in a situation where this is the best they can do is certainly one thing. But lamenting that they're doing it is quite another thing altogether. Now, some people might find it difficult to sleep during the day or give up some of their social interactions that take place at normal hours, right? But all this means is that these people are unlikely to find the trade-off of additional dollars for working at night worth it, right? Some people might have no problem sleeping during the day at all, or they might have no trouble giving up these sort of leisurely activities during normal hours, and so they might be perfectly willing to take an additional $1,000 to work at night. Some people might be just barely willing to do so, and others might be willing to do so for much less. But what this tells us, so the important insight, is that if the compensating differential falls to, say, $900 from 1,000, then fewer people will take the less pleasant job, right? So if you only get paid $900 to take the unpleasant job, and you used to be paid $1,000 extra to take the unpleasant job, well, we'd expect fewer people to take the unpleasant job, right? We'd expect the people who valued the normal working day at $900 or more to switch and go work during the day, like quote unquote normal people. Okay. Now let's pause there because this video is already getting long enough. We'll start another video to continue on page 7 of the notes for class.